Welcome, everybody. I hope everybody has had a great day. We're excited to see you here at our Croatan High School. Today is Wednesday, July 28th, 2021, and y'all are at a special called meeting for the Carteret County Board of Education. We are going to do the pledge and our invocation, and Ms. Katie Statler will lead that.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to meet here and providing us a place to meet. Thank you for each family that's represented here. Please help us to have open and respectful conversation and keep the best interests of our students and staff at the forefront of every decision we make. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Katie. All right, we are moving right along, and I need a consideration for approval of the meeting agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
We have a first by Reverend Goodwin. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. McLean. All in favor, raise your right hand. Very good. That passed unanimously. We will move on to the first item, which is receive the policy revision for first read from Mr. Blair Probst.
Sorry, let me move some of this out of my way so I don't drop my computer too. Good evening, board. Before you is just one policy tonight. It is a policy the board is asked to be revised. It is policy 7720, employee political activities. Since there's only one policy and there was a request for revision, I am going to actually read the portion that has been revised. The portion that has been revised is the ending policy. And that particular policy says, or that particular phrase or portion of it says, this policy should not be construed as prohibiting impartial study and discussion of political or other controversial issues in the classroom setting. The revision includes the remaining part of that sentence, which says, including the dissemination of factual information about serious problems the school system or community may be facing because of political actions where such teaching or information reasonably relates to the standards of the course. Both sides of the political issue shall be presented, supported by primary or balanced secondary sources, so that students are provided an opportunity to be well informed and to be able to make their own decisions regarding political or other controversial issues. Further, this policy shall ensure that social theories of any kind, Holocaust denial theory, 9/11 theory, critical race theory, those are examples, are not presented to students unless approved by the Carteret County Board of Education. It is the responsibility of the board to ensure that curricular standards are taught using well-documented factual resources and not opinion or conjecture. And that is the only edit to that policy. However, I will say I've had conversations with Mr. Whitford, and prior to the second read before the board, he intends to make a few adjustments to that policy, and I'll highlight those next time it comes before you, which will be in September.
Fantastic.
Any questions?
Any questions, board? I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Probst. Thank you. All right, Dr. Jackson is up for consider revisions to the North Carolina Department of Health Strong Schools NC Public Health Toolkit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, board members. Good evening, all who are gathered. We certainly appreciate that. In some ways, I've got to tell you that I'm having a feeling of deja vu when it comes to presenting revisions to the North Carolina Safe Schools Toolkit and our Return to Learn plan. As you know, we've had to make many changes from the time that I arrived, July 1st, over a year ago. And in fact, we've been guided by four primary sources. The first, the Strong Schools North Carolina Public Health Toolkit, that's published by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. The second is the Lighting Our Way Forward document that's published by the State Board of Education. The third is governor's executive orders that have come and gone. And then the fourth was Session Law 2021-220 that came into being last spring. And that was actually the session law that allowed our middle schoolers and high schoolers to return to school. And so this evening, I want to share with you an overview of the latest revisions. This is actually, by my count, the 11th revision to this document since this started. This revision was dated July 21st, 2021. Primarily as a starting point, I want to highlight this quote from the very front of the toolkit. In fact, it's on page 1. And it says, quote, added language on the importance of offering in-person learning regardless of whether all the prevention strategies can be implemented at the school. And so in this statement, they're saying we have added to the toolkit language that says being in person with our teachers, elbow to elbow, face to face, is incredibly important, even when all of the prevention strategies cannot be implemented. And so I very much appreciated that, because that absolutely aligned with our Board of Education's philosophy about our students being in school as much as they safely could. And certainly a point of pride for our school system has been our students being in school over the course of the year, much more so than some children, unfortunately, in other parts of the state. And so certainly a point of pride for us, and I appreciate the toolkit launching off with the acknowledgement of that is so very important for our children to be in the classroom. The toolkit has been revised in a substantial way. One of the biggest revisions is that what was called Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C is no more. You'll recall last year about this time, we had a meeting that was just over 6 hours, I believe. We had over 70 employees on 7 different committees who had gathered together over the summer to create plans A, B, and C for our school system as required by the governor. Because of that work, we were able to move nimbly through the year as changes came about. And so we very much appreciate that work. But in this moment, I very much appreciate that we don't have to have a plan A, B, and C going into the new school year. Among those things no longer required in the toolkit based on where we are in the pandemic, we're no longer required to have daily wellness checks. We were able to suspend those last spring, so we will not be taking temperatures or asking the wellness questions at the front door or before students get on the bus. There's no longer a requirement that we offer remote learning as a standalone educational opportunity. Certainly if a student is in school and then has to be out, we will do everything we can to work with that child. And so there potentially could be some remote learning, but there's no requirement that there has to be a standalone remote learning program. The prohibition against field trips and assemblies, as you know, we weren't able to participate in those items last year. That has gone away. So going into the new year, we will be able to participate in field trips and have assemblies. We no longer have to have one-way hallways and one-way stairways. As we discovered this summer and are still discovering, it is very hard work to get that tape back up off of our halls and are lining all of our halls, and our custodians are working hard to get the hallways stripped and waxed and to get that adhesive back off the floors, but we won't have to do that this year. Again, the daily symptom screening we do not have to do, and social distancing on the buses has also been removed as a requirement. Perhaps the biggest change in the language, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly, and then in just a few moments, Mr. Whitford will go in further depth, is that the toolkit prior to this revision used the words required and recommended. The school system is required to fill in the blank. The school system is recommended to do fill in the blank. Those words primarily have been taken out of the toolkit, and now words of should and could have replaced them. And so the school system should consider implementing these strategies. The school system could consider implementing these strategies. And so again, Mr. Whitford will go into greater detail about the legal requirements behind should and could. In terms of the educational experience for our students going into the 2021-2022 year, first of all, the biggest celebration, the thing I am happiest about, is that all of our students will be on a full academic schedule. So all of our students pre-K through high school will be attending school 5 days a week. We were close to that by the end of the year last year, but some of our high school students were still on 4-day-a-week schedules. And so all of our students will be on a full academic schedule 5 days a week. We will have a standard bell schedule. We've been advertising that, and of course that'll go out with back to school information to parents. Standard bell schedule simply means that our elementary schools all will start at the same time, our middle schools start at the same time, the high schools start at the same time, and our special schools have schedule for them, and that's primarily to avoid traffic issues. For example, on this campus, we had some issues between Bogue Sound and Croatan, with both schools having parents coming to pick up or drop off students at about the same time. And by going to that standard bell schedule, we've been able to mitigate that. So again, we'll be on a 5-day-a-week standard bell schedule. We will have face-to-face instruction in all of our schools, and looking forward to that. And then we will social distance to the extent possible in all of our public spaces. And so here in the media center, in the hallways, in the gymnasium, in the classrooms, we'll continue to socially distance to the extent possible. And so we won't state that that will be X inches or X feet, because it's not always possible in every space. We'll do our very best in the space and with the limits we have. In terms of our health and wellness protocols going into next year, again, we will social distance to the extent possible. We'll continue to have hand sanitizer readily available. I don't see that ever going away. We will continue to emphasize hand washing, particularly with our youngest students, but all of our students. We'll continue with our ongoing disinfection of high-touch areas. Our teachers and staff members all pitched in throughout the year last year to clean desks between classes and to make sure that door handles were sanitized or disinfected on a regular basis. We'll continue to do that. A big change for us will be the ability to allow visitors and volunteers to resume normal activities. One of the losses we had last year was that our volunteers, who are so very important to our academic program, weren't allowed to come into the building to read to children or serve in the media center. And so with the revisions to the toolkit, we'll now be allowed to allow visitors and volunteers to resume normal activities in support of our students and their academics. In terms of transportation, again, the wellness checks and the seating requirements are no longer in place in the latest revision of the toolkit. We will social distance to the extent possible on our buses. We will continue to keep hand sanitizer readily available, and we'll continue to disinfect high-touch areas throughout the school bus. In terms of child nutrition, we will be resuming the use of our serving lines. We did not do that last year. We'll be able to resume use of the serving lines. In our schools, the individual schools will make determinations about some schools. This past year had all students eating in their classrooms. Some schools had some students in the classroom, some in the cafeteria. We're going to allow the school-based, site-based management teams to make that determination based on what works best for the school and for their schedule. Because we did find some value to having the students actually eating in their classrooms. And so we'll let the schools make that determination, but we will resume the use of our serving lines. Again, hand sanitizer readily available and continuing to disinfect high-touch areas. The next area is cloth face coverings. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, and the American Academy of Pediatricians recommend the use of cloth face coverings in K-8 schools for all persons in kindergarten through 8th grade, pre-kindergarten through 8th grade, and then in our high schools for all unvaccinated persons. The toolkit, though, goes on to say, and this is a direct quote with the link there on the slide, if a school does not require individuals who are not fully vaccinated to wear a mask, they should ensure a layered mitigation strategy, including physical distancing, ventilation, hand hygiene, adequate access to diagnostic and screening testing, and closely monitoring for increases in COVID-19 cases. And so I would share with the board, regardless of the decision that you make this evening, we will certainly be embracing and engaging in a layered mitigation strategy. Another point of pride for me and for our school system has been our sharing of information around cases of COVID-19 throughout. And so on our website, all of the cases are listed, actually listed by school, by date. A weekly report has appeared on our website on Fridays, and we'll continue to do that. So we will continue to monitor COVID-19 cases going forward. We'll certainly continue physical distancing in all of our spaces. Our ventilation we're very blessed. Our ventilation systems will continue to monitor and improve on that. And then hand hygiene we've talked about as well. The last area to touch on is quarantines. Quarantines are actually the purview of the local health department. I had the opportunity to meet with our health director, Ms. Oliver, the director of consolidated services, and the director of nursing for the health department. And we had a great conversation. The Carteret County Health Department has been a wonderful partner for the school system. They very quickly pick up the phone. Our school nurses have many conversations with the health department. And so I certainly want to highlight what great partners they've been. The quarantine determination, though, is made by the local health department. And as it's written in the toolkit, quarantines are required, continue to be required for an individual who's been a close contact, which continues to be defined as within 6 feet for at least 15 minutes cumulatively over a 24-hour period of someone who's determined to be positive with COVID-19, either through testing or symptoms consistent with diagnosis, with the following 3 exceptions. Individuals who are fully vaccinated and do not have symptoms do not need to quarantine after a close contact. My recommendation to the board would be that we not try to continually track who's been vaccinated or not vaccinated, but when a situation might come up, then the question might be asked at that point. So not trying to in any way create a situation where we've got those who have and those who haven't or any of that sort of thing, but to keep that a private conversation between the nurses and perhaps the administrators and the families. The second exception is people who've tested positive for COVID-19 within the past 3 months and recovered or do not have symptoms. They do not have to quarantine. The third is students who are not fully vaccinated after a close contact in a classroom or other school setting. If masks are being worn appropriately and consistently by both the person with COVID-19 and the potentially exposed persons, they would not need to quarantine either. There is an additional potential exception to the quarantine, and that's for persons who are not fully vaccinated and have tested antibody positive within 3 months before immediately following a close contact. They may not need to quarantine if they have limited or no contact with persons at high risk for severe COVID-19 illness, including older adults and persons with certain medical conditions. Exemption from quarantine is based on a recent positive antibody test, can be considered on a case-by-case basis if approved by the local health department. And so I'll pause here and simply reiterate again my great pride in our school system staff who worked so very hard to implement our health and wellness protocols throughout the year last year with great fidelity. I can't tell you how many thousands of times I had my temperature checked, because every time I walked into a school, my temperature was checked, and that's a credit to our staff because they were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. And so I do believe that we contributed to the low number of cases in our county because of the hard work in our school system, and we'll continue to do that, and certainly appreciate the board's leadership. And so this time I'd like to recognize Mr. Whitford, who will share with the board a legal update with regards to the toolkit revision.
Mr. Chairman and board members, as the attorney for the school system, I have been researching any legal mandates relating to cloth face coverings, which we all refer to as masks, in public schools beginning July 31st, 2021. Based on this research, it is now clear that local school boards in North Carolina have the authority to make decisions regarding whether to require masks or not. As of July 31st, the state has removed the previous statewide mandate requiring masks and essentially delegated to local school boards the authority to make these decisions. Now, this status of the law could be temporary. Over the last few days, we've seen authorities in many states rethinking relaxed preventative measures as COVID cases again are on the rise, and perhaps more importantly, that hospitalizations are increasing. The news yesterday was that the Center for Disease Control guidelines changed once again to where the CDC was recommending mask wearing for everyone in schools, whether vaccinated or not. So then we also heard that I think tomorrow DHHS is potentially going to revisit this issue or issue some statement about it. So whatever we say today it might not actually be in place tomorrow. We need to keep that in mind. The origin of the previous mask mandates at least started with a governor's order issued last year under a set of the general statutes. Those are the laws of the state of North Carolina that are called the Emergency Management Act. And in the governor acted in a series of what are called emergency executive orders. The governor, in one of his first orders with respect to schools, delegated to the NC Department of Health and Human Services the authority to issue protocols consistent with his emergency orders pertaining to various public health measures to be taken in schools. Now, it's interesting to note, and it does become important in some of these issues, that under a different body of statutory law called the Public Health Law of North Carolina, DHHS has rather sweeping powers independent of the governor to take measures to protect the public from infectious disease. But at least as this got started, the governor took the lead, but then he brought in DHHS, and DHSS responded with what Dr. Jackson put up on the screen a minute ago, the publication called Strong Schools NC Public Health Toolkit K-12. It was originally published in June of 2020, revised as the superintendent indicated. And for the most part, the governor's emergency order and the toolkit lined up and went forward together. Then moved to June of this year by Executive Order 220, which was dated June 11th. The governor removed the mask mandate in schools that he had previously issued and completely delegated the decision to DHHS to be addressed in the toolkit. The toolkit at that time continued to reflect the governor's previous mask mandate. But then on July 21st, to be effective July 30th, DHHS revised the toolkit in important ways. An explanatory note states that the toolkit has been updated to provide school leaders with greater flexibility in implementing the layered preventative strategies based on current COVID trends and updated CDC guidance. Most importantly, in the revised toolkit for masks, the word required was eliminated and replaced with the word should. And should is an interesting word. While in past decades, the word was considered obligatory, and even many current dictionaries define it to be an obligation. The most recent legal trend is to define the term as a recommendation and not a requirement. This trend is supported by a Supreme Court case that I have brought to your attention, and supported by the federal plain language guidelines issued in 2011, which was published for the purpose of ensuring clarity in drafting federal regulations. And now the publication was referring to the word shall, and it goes on to say that when federal code writers are writing code, if they use the word should, then it is for a recommendation and not a mandatory obligation. The toolkit is a legal document and is subject to the rules interpreting legal documents. Though I have not spoken with anyone at DHHS, I can tell you with certainty that the change of the previous protocol on masks from required to should was intentional and was designed to give local school boards flexibility to address the pandemic based on local circumstances. And this flexibility allows local boards to rescind mask mandates without violating the law. And so, Mr. Chairman, those are my findings.
Thank you, Mr. Whitford, and thank you, Dr. Jackson. So board, we're at the moment where if we have got any questions, thoughts, ideas, well, Dr. Jackson, of ourselves, Mr. Whitford, now is the time to air them, talk about them.
But I'm sure it'll probably come as no surprise to most of you that I feel strongly that we should pass something tonight that allows our kids to have mask optional, everybody in our school system to have the option of whether they want to wear masks. But beyond that, I would like to ask that our administration and our board lawyer could at least investigate, continue to research and investigate what flexibility we may have regarding quarantine rules. And that isn't something I'm asking for us to make a decision on tonight, but I think we should at least investigate it. For example, the definition of a close contact still being 6 foot and things like that. So I want to know for certain what flexibility we have in tailoring quarantine rules for our particular school system. So that's something that we could at least look at.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Day. Anybody else?
That can be a motion.
I'm not forcing you.
Yes, I will make that a motion yes, that's fine. But let's get some discussion.
I just want to be sure that if the Delta variant were to pick up and something were to happen, or we are to have a large outbreak, we do still hold the option to go virtual in the event that it's needed to protect our students and staff at any time.
Go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you for the question. And so if we were in a situation where we had to quarantine, for example, a class, or if we had to quarantine a school, or if we had to move back to what was previously called Plan C virtual, we would certainly be positioned to do that. Teachers will be assigned to students just like they always have, and then they would begin to instruct their students virtually. And so although we will not have a separate standalone virtual academy, we will continue to have that option. And in the event of, God forbid, inclement weather, we may choose to use remote learning during inclement weather to allow our students to continue to progress academically as well. So yes, that would certainly be available.
Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Day. I think that we should make masks optional. Therefore, if someone feels that they need to wear a mask and that is what's keeping them safe, then they're to do so and they're able to do so. But I also think that those parents and students who feel that they are comfortable with removing their masks can do so as well.
And I agree, and I want to make sure that people know that we're not going to allow bullying on either side. That if you've got your mask on, that's fine. If you don't have your mask on, that's fine, but we're not going to allow anybody to bully whoever.
Sharing decision.
Right.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a second to Mr. Day's motion, but I would like some more discussion.
Well, I think before we make a second, we have to have the discussion.
We had to have a second before the discussion.
Mr. Chairman, technically, Bubba is correct.
Okay.
But with respect to board operations, you don't absolutely have to follow everything with a dotted I and a crossed T. And so
It's a learning experience for me. I appreciate it.
I think it's perfectly fine to have this discussion and then have a second if it hasn't been seconded by Ms. Wheatley. But I think you're fine. Even though Bubba is.
So, well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take Bubba's second. We've got a second, now we'll have discussion.
I didn't mean to. Yeah.
No purpose.
Didn't mean to cut off the discussion.
No, we're
No,
good.
I want to have some more discussion regarding virtual learning. How many students did we have sign up the first go round?
Approximately 150 grades kindergarten to 12. In some grade levels, that was as few as 4 students in the entire county in that grade level.
Now, one thing that I would ask, as long as it's not a strain on the school system, and if the board agrees, if we do go mask optional, that may push some people back to virtual. And instead of losing them to a North Carolina virtual charter school, I would prefer to keep them here. Can we send out another survey if we decide to go mask optional? see if that changes the numbers at all. Would anybody be opposed to that?
Can I make
Right.
another recommendation on that?
Sure.
We have reached out, of course, everybody didn't get it. What if we made it public? Newspapers, any other way we can, where the parents reach out to us. We give email addresses, phone numbers, whatever way. Like, because of the decision of the board, I would like my student to be enrolled. Because we're still gonna miss some. And it puts the responsibility on the parents. Because part of all this is the parents have ultimate responsibility for their children's welfare. And we're trying to acknowledge that this is a parental responsibility of the school system. Though we do care, not a state responsibility, it's always a parental responsibility. And this way, it's just a suggestion, but we put it out there so that they can reach out to us and make it as easy as possible.
And I'm not even sure what you just said regarding, I mean, I think that if we decide to go mask optional, the vast majority, I think, will come back. Those that aren't are going to homeschool, private school, virtual school. The virtual school, if we can keep those children under our Carter County Public School umbrella, then I want to, but I don't want to put any undue strain on the system to have to reach out to parents. I mean, I want to put the information out there. If you want your kid to be virtual, let us know by next week.
Dr. Jackson, we did see that. How was that disseminated the first time?
So we made 2 phone calls to parents to make them aware of the survey. We placed the survey on our website and on our social media as well. That was as the school year was coming to an end. So it's possible folks were already going into summer mode. But we tried our best to get that word out about the survey and left it open. Mr. McKay actually led that effort for us.
And the main reason I brought that up is we do a very good job of communicating. I had gotten a couple of emails and calls, and I think y'all had too, of people that claimed that they never got it. So just to be completely fair to everybody, and I would be interested to know if those numbers change greatly, understanding that if we still don't have the numbers to justify it, then we wouldn't do it. And also realize that it's really short time to ramp up a virtual academy with dedicated teachers as well. That's what we're talking about, right?
Dr. Jackson, I would also like to ask about the possibility or what are the plans for accommodating students who must be quarantined. I want to minimize the amount of quarantine time of students out of school if it isn't absolutely necessary for safety and safety of our kids and everybody else in the school system. But for those kids who may have to end up quarantining, what kind of accommodations are we going to have for them to be able to make sure they don't fall behind?
Sure. So in many ways, it's quote unquote business as usual because we've had students who've had to miss school as long as there's been school for a variety of reasons, medical and otherwise. And so when a student has to be out, teachers work with the parents to provide accommodations so that they can either make up work or take work with them or engage in the work while they're out. And so teachers work directly with our parents and we'll plan to continue to do that.
I know that quite a few during COVID, while everybody was away from school, we had quite a few teachers that did an excellent job of making sure that they had their classes recorded and it would be available to the students who were at home. And I know not everybody was able to do that, but that was really wonderful. I got so many compliments about that from parents, the fact that they could actually feel like their kids weren't totally missing out and they were somewhat still connected. And I think that would be a great option if we can kind of investigate some of those possibilities.
Is there a North Carolina virtual academy for all grades right now?
So when we say North Carolina virtual, there's 2 different entities that 3 different entities that have similar names, but they're very different. North Carolina virtual is a public school that has online classes that's available to all public high schools. And so if we had a high school student who wanted to take Russian, and we don't have a Russian teacher, they could take a Russian class online through North Carolina Virtual through our school system. There's also a North Carolina Virtual Public Charter School, which is like a charter school, except that it's completely virtual. And then there's one other virtual charter school as well. North Carolina Virtual, the classes that are available through the public school system, through our high schools, are primarily high school classes. They've been doing some pilot work around middle school classes, but primarily are limited to high schools right now.
And Mr. Chairman and board members, and Kathy Carswell is here with us tonight. She can chime in if I get this wrong. But if one of our students goes to virtual charter school, that per pupil money, both state and local, almost all of it goes with the student. And so that's, I think, in part why Mr. McLean would like options to keep schools enrolled with us.
And to put that in perspective, if those 150 kids win and it's, I don't know the number, $5,000, that's $750,000 that we would lose essentially.
But we're also talking about losing kids to private schools because they don't have to wear a mask at private schools.
That's right.
Yep. So we need to put pencil to that number.
We're not gonna have to worry about that tomorrow.
Before, any other discussion, any thoughts? Before we take a vote, I'd like to, whatever vote we make tonight is probably gonna upset somebody. I'm sure I'll get some mean emails tomorrow. I don't know what y'all believe out here. I don't know that I've met most of y'all, but I'm glad y'all are here. You know, I get a lot of emails that say you're not a doctor, you need to follow the science. And I'm a slow play guy. I do my research, and every one of these board members does the same thing. And you know, it's funny, the science actually has pros and cons for masks, and that's all fine and good. But part of our job is to look beyond the science, is to look at the educational aspect, to look at the social aspect, the psychological aspect, and the emotional aspect. So when we make a decision, we've got to pull all of that together. And we're here for the kids. You know, we appreciate the parents' input, whether you're for mask or against mask, we appreciate that. But we've got to look at every aspect of it. And, you know, that's what and I love these people because they make the decisions that way. So with that said, Ms. Wheatley has made a motion to make mask optional for this coming school year, and Mr. McLean has seconded it. All in favor?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I want to make sure we get this right. I believe Mr. Day made the motion.
Yes.
Mr. McLean seconded it. And
I will get good at this one day. I will get good at this one day.
We all kind of jumped around.
So Mr. Day made the motion to make mask
Can I say
optional.
one thing also?
Yes.
I especially want to thank the teachers that emailed us because they're trusting us that we are going to keep their thoughts confidential and sharing with us stuff that, you know, it does make them nervous to share with the board or the superintendent their opinions, but they are parents also, and they are with our kids every day. So I really appreciate those teachers that felt that they could trust us with this.
Absolutely. And they were powerful emails, So I will start this again. We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Day. Ms. Wheatley seconded it, or maybe Mr. McLean seconded it.
I don't care.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Very good. That passes unanimously. With that said, we are done, and I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, I've got a motion by Reverend Goodwin and a second by Mr. McLean. Raise your right hand everybody raise your hand if you approve. Very good. We're done. Thank you.